This building right here is one of two remaining slave cabins here at Oakland Plantation. Now the buildings were built in 1860, so slaves only would have lived here for a few years. So for most of the history of this building, it was the home of sharecroppers or tenant farmers. Now the sharecroppers didn't own any land. They lived here and they had to turn over a portion of their crop to the Prudhomme family. And being a sharecropper was a very tough way to get ahead, because you might work an entire year and let's say the boll weevil wiped out the cotton crop. Then all of that year's worth of labor is for nothing. And so for that very reason, you had large numbers of sharecroppers and tenant farmers here in the South migrating up to places like Detroit and Chicago to work in factories. Now there continued to be people living in here in the 1950s, but it was around that time when the Prudhomme family started acquiring tractors. And once they mechanized, then that put the sharecroppers out of work for good. So whatever few remaining sharecroppers or tenant farmers were here around the 1950s, once tractors came in, they were forced to move elsewhere. This building was full of all sorts of dry goods and medicine and combs and toothbrushes. So basically anything that someone needed was right here in this building. Later on, the building became a service station, and for many years it was a post office. And since the sharecroppers and tenant farmers didn't have cash, they would acquire things here on credit. So at the end of the year when the cotton was picked, they had to settle their debt with the landowner, and they also had to settle their debt here at the plantation store. So like I said earlier, it was a very difficult way to make a living as a sharecropper. Now our tour has brought us to Magnolia Plantation, the second unit of Cane River Creole National Historical Park. Just like Oakland, Magnolia stayed in the same family for 200 years. This is a bicentennial farm. The family that started Magnolia Plantation was the LeCount family. Now eventually the LeCount daughters married into the Herzog family, so the Herzog name took over and would have the plantation well into the 20th century. Now as we walk around Magnolia, you'll see a lot of similarities between Magnolia and Oakland. They were both communities of people with different buildings and different people doing different jobs that were part of this team that helped this plantation function. But there are some big differences as well. Probably the biggest difference you're going to see between Oakland and Magnolia is going to be at the very end of the tour. And I won't spoil the surprise for you, but it's a pretty cool ending. Behind me, you can see one of the remaining brick slave tenant cabins here at Magnolia Plantation. Now, the first people to live in this building were slaves. But for most of the history of these buildings, just like at Oakland, they were the homes of sharecroppers and tenant farmers. And we're very fortunate today to have some folks who actually lived in these buildings with us. So rather than me talk about the building, I'm going to let members of the Randolph family share with you their experiences growing up in these buildings and growing up here at Magnolia Plantation.
I'm Cynthia.
My name is Thomas.
And I'm Creole.
We lived in this house when we was coming up. My mother worked for the Herzogs. She worked in the big house, but this was our main house that we lived in. We played in here and we did everything. We had fun. My mom took care of us. It was hard, but she took care of us, and so we had a good time on the farm and stuff, on the plantation and stuff. So we just made do what we had to do here to survive.
All right, now we're in the Magnolia Plantation store, and rather than me tell you about it, I'm going to turn things over to the Randolph family. So here's Thomas Randolph, and just tell us a little bit about what you remember about this building.
Well, in this store, we used to come through the front door. Okay, around on these shelves, you had clothes, you had shoes, you had a little bit of everything in the store that you needed.
So here we are again inside the Magnolia Plantation store. And just like the store at Oakland, this building was constructed after the Civil War. And it was the general store for the people that lived here. The sharecroppers and the tent farmers and their children would come here, and like you heard the Randalls say, they'd get candy and sodas and clothes and shoes and just about anything you needed was right here on these shelves. And today it's kind of barren here, but like the Randolph said, every shelf was full, stuff was hanging from the ceilings. And so, I mean, in a way, this was kind of like a Walmart. Everything you needed was right here in this building. So here we are at the Magnolia Blacksmith Shop. Now, just like Oakland, Magnolia Plantation was a community of people working together. And the blacksmith was a very important part of this community. He made tools, he repaired tools, he made nails, he probably made horseshoes and shoes for mules. And a unique aspect of this building is what it's made out of. It's made out of a material called boussillage. Boussillage is mud mixed with moss or straw or some kind of organic material to kind of hold the mud together. Then they'd take that mud while it was still wet and pack it into the walls. And it would dry, and it's sort of like brick, or more like adobe, which they have out west. Cultures all around the world have their version of boussillage. It has a different name wherever you go. So they didn't invent that here on Cane River, but a lot of the buildings at Oakland and Magnolia have this in their construction. We're still on park property right here. But if you look behind me, just on the other side of those 4 big live oak trees, you can see the Magnolia main house. The main house sits on private property. It's still lived in by members of the Herzog family. And the Herzogs, they're descendants of the LeCounts. And the LeCounts were the family that established Magnolia Plantation way back in the late 18th century. Behind me here is the Magnolia Overseer House. So just like Oakland Plantation, Magnolia was a large operation, and they had an overseer here as well. Now, we also think at one time this building could have been a slave hospital. Again, these places were large communities of people. Magnolia was even bigger than Oakland. They had over 200 slaves here. And so when the slaves got sick and when they needed medical treatment, they needed a place to come. So we're pretty sure that at one time this overseer's house also served as a hospital or a place where slaves could seek medical treatment. Now, I mentioned earlier that during the Civil War, the family's house was burned down by Union soldiers. After their home was burned, the Herzog family lived here in the overseer's house for about 30 years until they built a new house, which is about 300 yards that way. Right here we got the Magnolia Gin Bar. Now, what we have in this building is something that you probably won't ever see anywhere else. Inside this building we have steam-powered gin and press. The gin, of course, is the machine that takes the seeds out of the cotton, and the press is the machine that takes the loose cotton after it's deseeded and presses it and compacts it into the bales. Now, that equipment was steam powered, but also in here we have a mule powered 1830s cotton press. Now, that 1830s cotton press is very special. There's only just a few of its type still in existence, and we think that the cotton press right inside that building might be the only one of its type that's in its original location. Well, that wraps up our tour of Cane River Creole National Historical Park. Hope you enjoyed both Oakland and Magnolia, but the best way to enjoy the park is to come here and visit the sites and talk with a ranger and really get to feel the history all around you. So I encourage y'all to make a trip down to Cane River, Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, and come visit our national park down here. We'll see y'all later.